Adab. When our daughter Shehrzad first learned to speak, she delighted Harvey and me by referring to herself with a surprising name. She'd been hearing us say things like, "We love you, do you want to eat, are you sleepy?" So naturally, she thought her name was You. For the longest time, we did not want to correct her because it sounded too adorable. Pick you up! You want some ice cream! Once she fell in the park, and people rushing to pick her up were confused because she was wailing, "Help you! Help you! You want to go home!" You became I within a few months for Shehrzad, but it left me thinking about what this innocent transposition between self and the other implied in a larger sense. What a powerful message, underscoring human connectedness. What if we are motivated not by I but by you? What if we cooperate instead of compete? What if universal altruism replaces self-promotion? What if, until I remembered that very practical aphorism coined by the Dallas Cowboys quarterback, Don Meredith: "If its and buts were honey and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas." While I was mulling over questions of this nature, my younger brother Abbas happened to call from Italy. After our usual exchange of family gossip, etc., and comedy of the impending elections, the wicked jokes were done with, Abbas, just before hanging up, said, "Oh, and I have a share for you, a couplet." I want to quote it here now because it's rather a realistic reflection of our actual default mode, our primitive, visceral state of being. क्या तकल्लुफ करें ये कहने में? Why feel embarrassed in admitting? क्या तकल्लुफ करें ये कहने में, जो भी खुश है हम उससे जलते हैं. I'm jealous of anyone who seems happy. Habib Jalib describes the attitude of all of us when he points out candidly, जिनको जहां का दर्द है मादूद चंद है, वरना तमाम अपनी तरक्की पसंद है. Those whose hearts ache for others are precious few. The majority are focused on self-promotion. जिनको जहां का दर्द है मादूद चंद है, वरना तमाम अपनी तरक्की पसंद है, और दश्ते वफा में साथ वो मेरे क्यों चले, नादा नहीं है दोस्त, बहुत होशमंद है. Why should they walk the altruistic path with me? They are not fools, but calculating and aware. My talk today is titled Paths to Altruism Through Science and Poetry. I plan to discuss both the biological imperatives for altruistic behavior and the representation of these complex motivations in some of our canonical as well as contemporary literary works, and what it means for the present time. Muhammad Ali, the greatest boxer of all time, was also an exceptionally gifted poet. He is acknowledged as the first rap artist in America. On June 4th, 1975, he delivered the commencement address at Harvard University. His speech received a thunderous standing ovation, the most tumultuous in the history of Harvard. As he was leaving, the crowd began to chant, "Poem, poem, poem." So he stopped halfway towards the exit door, turned around, recited this poem. It is as profound in its meaning as it is striking in its brevity. Muhammad Ali stood still for a moment and simply said, "Me, we." And he departed. me, we. A seamless passage from a point of selfishness to a place of inclusion. A transition from seeking singularity to embarking on plurality. The mirror image of the poem reads, we, me, which is the exact opposite meaning of me, we, as it takes us from altruism to egotism. Muhammad Ali is asking the Harvard graduates to commence on a voyage of self-discovery, find their location in the real world, and realize that it takes a village to share the joys and sorrows, raise families, mourn their dead. Sort of what John Donne meant when he said, no man is an island entire of itself. Each is a part of the continent, a part of the main. Every man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind and therefore never sent to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. This is how connected we are. This is the meaning of me, we. Each person's death diminishes us and therefore never sent to know for whom the bell tolls. The question I want to ask is why altruism exists at all? How and why has it survived the fundamental rule of evolutionary biology, which is survival of the fittest? Charles Darwin proposed in The Origin of Species that all life forms have descended from a common ancestor and that during the process of evolution over millennia, nature selects those organisms for survival that best fit the environment. For example, Jonathan Wiener's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Beak of the Finch, recounts the study of an island populated with trees producing hard seed pods and soft seed pods. Well, finches with small beaks and large beaks also thrive in that island until a catastrophic storm came and destroyed all the trees that were bearing the soft seeds. So now only hard seed pods were left on the island, and the birds that had the larger beaks suddenly had an advantage because they could crack open the nuts. So the poor small beaked ones, starved to death slowly, became extinct. In this world of intense competition for survival, Darwin was astounded to observe undeniable acts of kindness where he saw the strong helping the weak. Mothers sacrificed their lives to save children. Men willingly hurled themselves into open jaws of death in battlefields to save nations, to save families. Richard Dawkins asked this question in his book, The Selfish Gene. Back in 1976, Dawkins suggested that Darwinian evolution has been misunderstood. Acts that can harm the self but benefit others serve neither I nor we, but the gene. The gene has to ensure its survival by being passed on to the next generation. Well, how can a gene be kind to itself? One example is the ground squirrel, the common squirrel that you see. The first squirrel to sense a predator lets out a loud alarm call that alerts the group to escape. By making this sound, the squirrel attracts the predator's attention, risking its own life to save the life of the group. This is truly an act of altruism. Scientists were fascinated by this clearly altruistic behavior and dived deep to explain it. The answers complicated things further. It turns out that more than 70% of the time, the call comes from a female squirrel. And even that happens only when its own children are in the back. So, Observations like these across the animal species then led to the theory of kin selection. The more related one is, the bigger the sacrifice one is prepared to make. Haldane famously joked that he would willingly die for 2 siblings, 4 nephews, and 8 cousins. This would be a fair deal because of the degrees of relatedness. Siblings are 50% identical by descent, nephews 25%, and cousins 12.5%. So the more related you are, the more prepared you are to make sacrifices. And this is how a gene is serving its own self. I'll give you another example of the vampire bats. They live on blood, often consuming their entire weight in blood overnight. The bats live in large colonies made up of hundreds of thousands of individual members. Failure to find a prey to suck blood from can kill them within 3 days. So the colony has figured out a way to ensure its survival. A hungry bat will lick the lips of a fortunate one with a belly full of blood. And the successful bat responds by locking its mouth with the hungry one and transferring blood to it. Robert Rivers calls this reciprocal altruism, where an act of kindness is shown with the hope that the favor will be returned in some future date. 80% of adult vampire bats would die of starvation every year if they did not depend on this kind of reciprocal altruism. Acts of kindness and altruism are seen among unrelated species too. Back in 1996, when I was living in Chicago, a little boy climbed into the gorilla pit in the Brookfield Zoo. As the mother and passers-by watched with horrified anxiety, Binti Jua, the 8-year-old female gorilla, climbed down from her perch, gently cradled and soothed the young injured boy and carried him to safety. The point is that the ubiquity of such behavior across species means that altruism could not be a losing strategy, or evolution would have eliminated it through natural selection. Kindness, compassion, empathy, goodness, these are vital necessities. Even science supports this. The gene's survival depends on the host, but the host's survival depends upon being looked after by the group. So serving the gene comes a full circle back to helping the group. No life form can exist in isolation. Are we born with these traits of compassion and kindness and goodness, or do we learn these traits? The Black American author and Nobel laureate Toni Morrison asks this question. Her conclusion is that one can learn these traits, develop a habit of learned goodness. For example, in the US, a law was in place until 1846 where teaching a black person to read and write was punishable by a fine of $100 and a jail sentence of 6 months. Yet a white priest risked his life to do exactly that. Morrison is one of the finest readers of the human condition. She knows and understands the power of the word. We die. That may be the meaning of life. But we do language, and that may be the measure of life. Morrison takes this measure by looking at goodness and altruism through the prism of literary works of fiction. And what she found is this. Goodness is mute. The theatricality of evil makes for compelling viewing. Goodness is associated with weakness. Evil has a blockbuster audience. Goodness lurks backstage. Evil has vivid speech. Goodness hides and bites its tongue. Contemporary literature is not interested in goodness. When it appears, it's with a note of apology in its hand and has trouble even speaking its name. Evil is easy to write about, goodness is much harder. Earlier authors like Dickens, Austen, Eliot, James, they described at great length the forces of malice in their novels. But generally their endings restored order. Wickedness was met by redemption as reward. But then the world wars came, the First World War and the Second World War, and the evil that was done was so monstrous, so irredeemable that no act of goodness or altruism could possibly provide relief. So writers that came after this, like Philip Roth and Saul Bellow, they used irony to paint the frailty, the pointlessness, indeed the comedy of goodness. From happy endings, literature went to ironic endings. Morrison invents a third way. Life is a journey into irresolution. Nothing gets resolved in real life. There are only brief moments of respite, of goodness. For Morrison, history lives not in books, but in bodies. Her great novel, Beloved, begins with the famous sentence, 124 was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. It's based on the true story of a runaway slave named Margaret Garner. As this slave is about to be captured, she killed her infant daughter to spare her a life of slavery. This is the most unnatural act imaginable, a mother murdering her own baby. But was this an act of selfishness or of altruism, the ultimate sacrifice? The task Morrison sets up for herself is to express this mother's grief, her anguish, her sorrow. It is so raw, so twisted, so brutal, so violent that ordinary words could not be used to express her emotions. So Morrison invents a new language, a fractured language. Using this broken, cracked language of pain, fragmented memories and words, Morrison details how the mother lives with this act of murdering her baby, haunted by the ghost of Beloved, the name she put on her epitaph because she could not pay for the 2 words she wanted, dearly beloved. Years later, when Seth, the mother, finally tells Beloved's story to her boyfriend, PD, he is stunned, unable to fathom the idea of murder as salvation. He says to her, girl, your love too thick. To which Seth replies, too thick? Love is or it ain't. I find this sentence to be profoundly moving. Love is neither thick nor thin. It either is or isn't. The grisly tale of Seth and Beloved represents the spirit of thousands of women dragged onto slave ships and the price they paid, and the price that humanity is continuing to pay for those acts of inhumanity. Toni Morrison paints the complexity of life by asking the reader to decide whether the murder of a baby is a selfish act or the ultimate in altruism. And what salvation could there be for such an evil act? In this chaotic world of bodies being transgressed, violated, Morrison restores the power and the dignity to her characters with the astonishing act not of a happy ending, but through an expression of goodness. Acts of goodness in her books, no matter how small, are not expressed through the language of comedy or irony. The goodness Morrison provides is that her characters develop some vital understanding, some self-awareness. Such insights have nothing to do with tragic or happy endings and everything to do with the acquisition of knowledge on display in the language of moral clarity. Clarity which is valuable, clarity that can be used to do some good for humanity. The realization that inside you, each one of you, is that free person who might do some good in this world, like Muhammad Ali's me, we, like a baby calling herself you, like Morrison lets goodness speak for itself through a language of its own. Love is or isn't. Our great Urdu poets ask essential questions about similar issues related to human behavior, but in an entirely unique way. Who deserves our full undivided love? This is what our poets ask. Who deserves our undivided love? God or man? With one joined, united, powerful voice, they unanimously and repeatedly emphasize the same answer. The only way to show your love for God is to show your love for humanity. Mir Taqi Mir, what a gorgeous shit. He's writing this in 1790s. There se utke Kabe aya Mir. There is a place of idol worship. There se utke Kabe aya Mir. Mir has abandoned the temples of idols for the sanctity of Kaaba in Mecca. There se utke Kabe aya Mir. Meaning, Mir has come to his senses and exchanged the previous Dionysian existence for the holy Kaaba. Ostensibly, this is a good thing. But in the second line, Mir declares the real insight into this seemingly pious decision. There se utke Kabe aya Mir, are jisko chahe Khuda kharab kare. Mir has abandoned the temples of idols for the sanctity of Kaaba. Verily, God leads astray whomsoever he pleases. Similar wise words. The point he's making in this sher is that it is easy to sit in a mosque and say Allah, Allah and go straight to heaven. But it is much harder to walk the walk with humanity and to try to do good things in this life and then deserve to go to heaven. And this is the point that all our poets make unanimously, that the easy way is completely rejected. No, you have to live in the midst of every complexity possible and then show that you deserve it. Similar wise words come from none other than Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib. The sher is from his celebrated ghazal that I would like to read in its entirety now. कल के लिए कराच न खिस्सत शराब में, अरे ये सूए जन है साक़िए कौसर के बाब में, है आज क्यों जलील के कल तक न थी पसंद, गुस्ताख ये फरिश्ता हमारे जनाब में, और जान क्यों निकलने लगती है तन से दमे सबां, जब वो सदा समाई है चंगो रबाब में। एंड माई फेवरेट, रौमे है रख्शे उम्र कहाँ देखिए थमे, न हाथ बाग पर है न पाहे रकाब में। इतना ही मुझको अपनी हकीकत से बोध है, जितना के वह में गैर से हूँ पेचो ताब में। और असले शहूदो शाहिदो मशहूद एक हैं, हैरान हूँ फिर मुशाहिदा है किस हिसाब में। है मुश्तमिल नमूद सवर पर वजूद बहर, या क्या धरा है कतरो मौजो हुबाब में। और शर्मिक अदाए नाज है अपने ही से सही, हैं कितने बेहिजाब जो हैं यूं हिजाब में। और आराइशे जमाल से फारिग नहीं हनूज, पेशे नजर है आईना दायम नकाब में। है गैब गैब जिसको समझते हैं हम शहूद, हैं ख्वाब में हनूज के जागे हैं ख्वाब में। The ghazal keeps getting better and better with each sher until the coming maqta, which I am about to recite now, which is so good that you can just shut down Diwan-e Ghalib right here and spend the rest of your life in worshipful appreciation of this one sher. This maqta is Ghalib's advice about how to lead a truly fulfilling life. Ghalib, नदी में दोस्त से आती है बूए दोस्त। Ghalib, the fragrance of a friend comes from another friend. Ghalib, नदी में दोस्त से आती है बूए दोस्त, मशहूल हक हूँ बंदगी बू तुराब में। To reach God, I worship the one covered with dust. Ghalib, being Ghalib, has added many layers of complexity in these two lines. The first interpretation is based on the legend that one afternoon the Prophet, peace be upon him, found Ali fast asleep in the mosque, covered with dust. He lovingly bestows upon Ali the title of Bu Turab, one made of dust. So the sher can now be interpreted as saying that God is a friend to Ali, and since you can reach an absent friend through a present one, all Ghalib has to do to reach God is to love Ali. That is the meaning of the first line. Ghalib, nadi mein dost se, nadi mein also means friend. दोस्त इज दोस्त, फ्रेंड, एनीवे। गालिब नदी में दोस्त से, दोस्त के दोस्त से दोस्त की खुशबू आती है। गालिब नदी में दोस्त से आती है बूए दोस्त, मशगूल हक हूँ बंदगी बू तुराब में। But then there's a second, a more profound interpretation. Ghalib's ideas of divine order are grounded in the world. In this reading, we can assign a different meaning to the fact of being made of dust, as referring not just to the person of Ali, but to all of mankind, because we are supposed to be made of dust. Ghalib's instructions in the manual of how to lead a meaningful life are supremely compact. The only purpose of life should be a complete, unafraid, unflinching, unblinking, unwavering dedication to loving and to serving humanity. And no matter what happens until the moment you die, your eyes must remain unblinkingly fixed on the object of this desire. Sorry, but I will read a short ghazal again in Urdu, which is so beautiful. I didn't bring it, it's not written down. It just came to me that I should read this for you. It's by Faiz Saab and so beautiful. किस हर्फ पे तूने गोशे लब ए जाने जहां गम्माज किया, ऐलान जुनू दिल वालों ने अब के बहजार अंदाज किया। 100 पैका थे पैबस्ते गुलू जब छेड़ी शौक की लय हमने, 100 तीर तराजू थे दिल में जब हमने रक्स आगाज किया। बेहिर्सो हवस बेखौफ खतर, इस हाथ में सर इस कफ पे जिगर, यूं कुए सनम में वक्त सफर नजारे बामे नाज किया। और जिस खाक में मिलकर खाक हुए वो सुरमए चश्मे खल्क बनी, जिस खाक में मिलकर खाक हुए वो सुरमए चश्मे खल्क बनी, जिस खार पे हमने खून छिड़का हम रंगे गुले तन नाज किया, लो वस्ल की साथ आ पहुंची, फिर हुक्म हुजूरी पर हमने आंखों के दरीचे बंद किए और सीने का दरवाज किया। किस हर्फ पे तूने गोशे लब ए जाने जहां गम्माज किया। Till the day you are dying, you must never look away from this absolute commitment to serving humanity. Emily Dickinson gives some valuable advice here. I had no time to hate because the grave would hinder me, and life was not so ample I could finish enmity. Think of what profound meaning these lines are. I had no time to hate because the grave would hinder me, and life was not so ample I could finish enmity. Nor had I time to love, but since some industry must be, this little toil of love I thought was large enough for me. And here's an example of this little toil of love Emily Dickinson is talking about. I'm a serious disciple of one named Perry Marshall, whose book Evolution 2.0 I had read with great interest and had the good fortune of meeting in 2020, thanks to the Cancer and Evolution Symposium that he and Professor James Shapiro, along with Frank Laukien and Henry Heng, had organized in Boston, where I gave the opening keynote lecture. Since that first introduction, Perry and I have become friends, and my admiration for this man and his lovely wife Laura has only increased with time. Laura always wanted to take in foster kids. Perry was what the foster world calls RH, reluctant husband. His problem was that the foster situation is temporary, but he finally was persuaded to give in. One day they got a call from the foster agency about a week-old black baby girl, Drea, from the west side of Chicago. They took the baby in, showered her with love and affection, but not unexpectedly, 2.5 months later, Drea's grandmother came for her. Perry and Laura had to live with the fact that they would never see her again. Except soon, the grandmother called to ask if they would agree to be Drea's godparents. So they trucked over to the old Ship of Zion Church of God in Christ, where they were the only white couple present. Drea had 3 older brothers for 10 years from that moment on. Perry and Laura took them to church every week. It became one large family with white cousins from the suburbs of Chicago and black cousins from the west side. Laura and Perry, who already had a baby of their own when they adopted Drea, went on to have 3 more. They still went ahead and adopted 2 more. Zaylin, a 19-month-old, is from an orphanage in China. She didn't walk, talk, or feed herself. Within 6 weeks of the adoption, she was doing all of those things. All it took was brothers and sisters. Now she's 14 and heavily involved in wheelchair basketball. Just this month here, she has set a weightlifting record for her weight class. ZJ was 9.5. Today he's 19. All these people are present here, by the way. I'm so honored to have you here and allowing me to tell your story. ZJ is 19 now. He's involved in sled hockey, discus, shot put, and swimming. He also set a bench press record this weekend for his weight class. I was fortunate enough to spend a few days with Kyler and ZJ, 2 of their kids, in Vancouver some months ago. It was incredibly moving experience to see the siblings bonding, making fun of each other, fooling around, but always in the most loving way. Nobody could be more protective of ZJ than his older brother Kyler. I have their permission to share this story, but with the caveat that Laura is allergic to being painted as a superhero or her children to be painted as victims. Laura and Perry don't want to be lionized for doing what they consider an honor and a privilege. Their toils of love are far above our poor power to add and detract. That is why I call myself their disciples. खुदा के बंदे तो हैं हजारों, वनों में फिरते हैं मारे मारे. खुदा के बंदे तो हैं हजारों, वनों में फिरते हैं मारे मारे. मैं उसका बंदा बनूंगा जिसको खुदा के बंदों से प्यार होगा. Many creatures wander the earth, claim to love God, but I will love the one who loves God's creatures. I love Chicago. This is where I lived through the best of times and the worst of times. The city took me on unexpected rides to cloud 9, but also smashed my heart into pieces when death and destruction entered my own home. Harvey was diagnosed with cancer when Scheherazade was only 4 years old. He died when she was 8. The sense of isolation, loss, and despair left me disoriented. Thoughts became fragmented and elusive. I felt a cleavage in my mind as if my brain was split. I tried to match it seam by seam but could not make them fit. The thought behind I strove to join unto the thought before, but sequence raveled out of reach like balls upon the floor. Were it not for the kindness of strangers in Chicago, I would not have survived. Toni Morrison is spot on when she represents an act of goodness in the form of her characters developing insights, that rare acquisition of self-knowledge. I did that in Chicago. Oprah Winfrey, our local legend at the time, gave very good advice. Feel the feel, then take the wheel. Anthony Lane interprets this sentence beautifully in his New Yorker piece titled, Can Happiness Be Taught? He says that behind this crunch, feel the feel, then take the wheel, lies an allegory of the chariot drawn by a pair of winged horses deployed by Socrates to illustrate the motions of the soul. One horse represents our nobler instinct, is upright in frame and well-jointed, whereas the other is a hell of a nag, a crooked, greyed jumble of limbs, forever dragging us down towards our lowest desires. So one horse is noble, the other is our lowest instincts. Which way do we go? This hectic ride through time is what Ghalib is referring to when he says, Rome hai rakshe umr kahan dekhiye thame, ne haath baag par hai na pa hai rakab mein. The horseman of life speeds by. Where can it be stopped? The hands are not on the reins, the feet not in the stirrups. All in all, chariot driving is a painfully difficult business, as is being alive. The task is to learn to become better charioteers, to somehow control our two horses as best as we can. Our hosts today, Doctors Shireen and Afzal Ahmed, are perfect examples of good charioteers. Besides lifetimes of serving their patients with sensitivity and humility, they have provided immeasurable service to the community by bringing the great accomplishments of South Asian artists and writers, musicians and philosophers, scientists and doctors to a Chicago audience. To these great charioteers, the best of altruists, I say Shireen and Afzal, Zindabad. Chicago, Zindabad. Thank you.